Hello, I'm Scott Halford, and this is Your Brain Matters. Today we're going to talk about feeding your brain, literally feeding your brain. Our body pretty much doesn't offer anything up for our brain's nutrition, so it all is external. We have to feed ourselves in a way that allows our brains to switch on. That includes what we drink and what we eat. Of course, water is incredibly important to the cells of all of our body, and in particular to the cells in our brain. We need about 10 times more water for the cells in our brain to operate properly than the rest of the cells in our body. So make sure that you're properly hydrated. In terms of food, it's really important to understand that the brain operates off of complex carbohydrates, glucose. It needs that in order to operate. And so when we take carbohydrates out of our diet, we might lose weight, but our brains aren't going to operate optimally. Complex carbohydrates are those that occur in nature, like in vegetables and fruit and certain fish and meats and poultry. The things that are simple carbohydrates are things we manufacture, like candy bars and marshmallows and bread. Those are things that are simple carbohydrates, meaning that the brain uptakes the glucose and the carbohydrates very, very rapidly and then spends them very rapidly. And so we have this up and down. We get a lot of energy and then we crash. Complex carbohydrates are kind of dispensed to the brain a little bit more slowly, so we want to pay attention to those. Of course, fruits are really important for the brain. Fruit in all forms are really important to the brain. We also want to pay attention that there's a lot of sugar in there, and so that's not always perfectly wonderful for the brain, but because it is a natural fructose, a natural sugar, it's uptaken into the brain a little bit more slowly. Really great source of carbohydrates, of course, are vegetables, and paying attention to the darker the green, the better. Nuts, really important for the brain. The oil in the nuts is something that the brain really, really needs in order to operate properly, including the kind of oil that we find in fish, like fatty fish, omega-3 fatty acids, in salmon and trout, sardines, things like that. The brain needs oils, so olive oil, canola oil, safflower oil. The oils of those things are actually really very beneficial for the brain. Things like avocados, which are high in an element called tyrosine, and tyrosine is necessary to create a neurotransmitter called dopamine, and dopamine is that neurotransmitter that makes us feel a toward state or pleasant and allows us to learn. Really important to also include grains and things that are natural from whole wheats and grains in our diet. Eggs are a great source of choline, as are apples a great source of choline. And choline is the amino acid that allows the synapses in our brain to fire rapidly. So if you need to think for a meeting and be very, very intensely focused, choline is the answer for you. When you add dairy to choline, like a slice of cheese to apple, it actually makes a very, very nicely slowed down uptake of that complex carbohydrate and allows the choline to be available for you. So a lot of different things to pay attention to, more than we can ever deal with in this. Start paying attention to what you put in your mouth. Make sure that you understand that as long as you're awake, your brain needs to be fed about every 2 to 2.5 hours if you're in a heavy thinking state. Don't skip breakfast. Don't skip lunch, and make sure that you actually are feeding yourself throughout the day, little bits and pieces, maybe nuts here, some vegetables here, a few things to nibble on. Make sure that your brain is fed, because then it will operate optimally. This is Scott Halford, and this is Your Brain Matters.